Hello everyone. Welcome back to Reddit Night, your favorite Reddit reading channel. Today we are taking a look at some stories from our /ghost stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe. My dad let me know he made it okay. My dad died on Monday. He'd been sick for a while. We brought him home on hospice Friday evening. He'd been saying he was ready to see his mom, dad, brothers and sisters again. By Sunday evening, he could hear and open his eyes but couldn't speak. My brother and I were sitting in the room with him that evening, just talking about random stuff. He brought up the subject of the stimulus checks and what we were going to do with them. I told him I'm spending mine on spiders. I was telling him I'd like to catch some local spiders, some of the bigger species and some jumping spiders because they're my favorite. My husband and I had been staying up with him nights to give my mom a break, and coming home to sleep during the day. We'd only been asleep a couple hours when mom called and said he was gone. We went back over to talk to the hospice nurse and be there when the funeral home came to get him. Me, my husband and my 2 sons sat on the deck for a while and smoked the rest of the last cigar my dad had been smoking on Easter. I went inside, talked to my mom and brother a while and said goodbye to dad one last time before they took him. All that took about an hour. I had went and took a shower and was getting redressed, putting the same pajama pants back on I'd been wearing outside. Something fell out of them. It was a baby zebra jumping spider. My legs gave out and I had to sit in the floor. My husband was in the shower. He looked out cause he thought it'd fallen. He asked me what was wrong and all I could do was point at her. I finally said it's from dad. He's letting me know he's okay, he made it okay. I went to get a container to put her in, when I came back and she hadn't moved. I put my hand beside her to try to boop her into the container. She crawled onto my hand and didn't move. I got her into her container and brought her home. I've named her Ollie, dad's middle name was Oliver, and she's doing great. Thanks dad, I love her and I hope you're having a good time with your family now. Love you. My aunt's ex-boyfriend. I've been told this by several different people. I believe it for that reason and a few others. This is the story. When my grandma left my abusive grandpa, many years before I was born, she moved herself and 2 of her 3 daughters, my mom and aunt, into a new house. My aunt met a guy and then they started dating. He was what you could call a greaser, hot rod driving, leather jacket wearing, greased back hair having dude. This would have been early 70s. Most nights he would park down the street and walk to her bedroom window, tap on it, and she would let him in through it. Her bedroom was at the back of the house, and the driveway was gravel, and it went past my mom's bedroom. My mom told me every time he did it, she would hear his boots crunching in the gravel as he walked by. They would do whatever they did and he'd climb back out the window and leave. Somehow she eventually met who would become my uncle, and they're still married, and she broke things off with the guy. He didn't take it well. One night he stopped by and tapped on the window. She let him in and they talked for over an hour, and he left. The phone rang in the living room and she went out to answer it. Her friend was on the other end, sobbing. She told my aunt that he had killed himself. He drove around in his hot rod with a buddy, drinking liquor and shooting mailboxes. They pulled into a convenience store parking lot and he shot himself in the face, killing himself. My aunt said that was impossible, as he had just left her house. She looked up and saw him standing outside staring at her through the living room window with blood all over his face. She screamed, woke everyone in the house, and he disappeared. My aunt told them that night what had gone on. That was the only time she ever spoke about it. I've asked her a couple times to tell me and she wouldn't. Grandma and mom eventually told me about it years later, at different times. From then on, my mom would hear his boots crunching in the gravel every night, and my aunt would hear him tap on the window. It got so bad for my aunt that she begged my mom to switch rooms. They did, and my mom heard the tapping on the window. Also, my grandma told me they'd always find his brand of cigarette butts in the ashtrays and only he smoked them. A few other things happened in that house before they moved, like my grandma woke up one morning an inch from the ceiling. When she screamed, the bed fell back to the floor. Back in 2008 or so I happened to deliver pizza to that house. I asked the woman if anything strange went on there and she froze. She said the back room window got tapped on all the time, as well as knocking on the side door. Even though the driveway was paved, she heard what sounded like boots on it all the time. Her husband worked nights so he didn't believe her or the kids, but she said almost every night something happened there. Edit, thanks everyone, so much for the comments. I spoke to my mom about this and she informed me some of my facts were wrong, so apparently my grandma told me these other things. This is what my mom said. His name was Joe. And after he killed himself, my aunt got a call from her friend who told her, and my aunt looked up and saw him looking through her bedroom window with blood all over his face. He did not, apparently, talk to her for an hour after he died. Although if this is going to turn into a multi-million-dollar movie franchise, he did, because that's creepier lol. Also, Grandma didn't wake up on the ceiling, her blankets were laying on the ceiling and her bed was shaking badly, and she thought it might be him. Mom said they never had any creepy things happen there before he died. Last, an interesting tidbit. When my grandma met her last husband, she moved in with him and sold the house to my aunt, who got married to my uncle and started having kids in that house. They eventually needed to upgrade to a bigger house and moved out in the early 80s. I barely remember going there to visit a couple times when I was a kid. The house that freaked out the builders and landscapers. Howth is a little village near Canterbury and Sturry, out on the old marshes that were once the Wansum Channel. A few years ago in 2014, my landscaping company were called to a job in a beautiful house there. The house was a converted barn and had been bought by the new owners who wanted some work to be done there before moving in, as is often the case. So the first step was to visit the property and take a look to come up with a price for the job. There was a great deal of land surrounding the property with extensive gardens that had fallen into a state of disrepair. After visiting the property, I returned saying that the place gave me the creeps and that although it was empty and isolated, several hundred yards from the next dwelling, it felt like I was being watched. Obviously, everyone laughed at me. I priced the job, which was a big one and would need us to be on site for about 5 days, and forgot about the whole thing. As it turned out, we were given the contract for the garden clearance and various tree works, and we booked in for a few weeks' time. When we arrived on site, there was a crew of builders there already, who were working inside the house, and living there for a couple of weeks while they carried out the renovations. When we arrived, we said our hellos, and John asked what they thought of the house. The reply was, "It's a lovely place, but it's haunted too." We laughed and asked why they thought that, and they told us that all night they could hear banging coming from empty rooms, their tools were being moved around, they heard whispering, and one had even received a phone call from a distant voice that couldn't be understood, from the number 000000000. He showed us the call record to prove it on his mobile phone. Interested, but till not entirely convinced, we got on with our work. Joe told us that the back courtyard garden gave him the willies, but apart from that, day one was uneventful. On day two, it was quiet in the morning, then in the afternoon, I went inside for a coffee. While I was there was knocking sounds coming from one of the back rooms. Nobody was in there, but it could well have been someone in one of the garden areas knocking against the wooden walls from outside while doing some job or another. But then there was a sound like wallpaper being unrolled, or a poster falling off a wall, something like that. It came from the hall, then out of the hall, a shadow shot through the kitchen and out of the front door. I was alone in the house at the time, and after looking at every angle, the only way the shadow could have been cast was by the kitchen lights in the middle of the room, but there was nothing to cast it. I was starting to become a believer. On day 3, Paul, one of the builders, was having an argument with somebody on the phone. When he hung up, he said, "I can't believe that. The driver from the skip company says he won't come here to pick up the skip unless we can promise there's someone on site to meet him because he reckons he saw something here when he dropped the skip off before we got here and it's definitely haunted." When he did arrive, he said that when he dropped the skip off the first time, he knew the place was empty but he saw someone moving around in there, and while he was unloading the skip the radio in his lorry came on loud with a load of static. Day 4 was quiet apart from the knocking and banging which we'd all got used to by then, even though it was louder than before, and definitely not one of us messing about. On day 5 a guy turned up to put in a new TV aerial and that involved some wiring being fitted in the back room where most of the noises came from. A few hours in, he was having a coffee with everyone else in the kitchen, and said that he'd be glad when he was done, because that room was creeping him out. He said that he was sure he kept hearing someone walking around in there but there was nobody inside the house, let alone in that room. The final thing that happened while we were working there, was that another contractor turned up to do some light fittings, and parked outside the house. While he was in there, his van radio came on really loud with a lot of static, just like the skip driver had said happened when he was there before. A few weeks after we'd been there, the new owners had moved in, and John and I went over to visit them and sell up the bill one evening after work. John was curious, and asked the owner if he was enjoying living there. He obviously read between the lines a bit, maybe he'd already been asked about the place by one of the other contractors, and he responded by saying, "It's a beautiful house, but I must say, takes on a completely different feeling at night. It's not such a nice place after it gets dark." We returned to work there a couple more times on smaller jobs, but as the clients were living there full time by then, we didn't spend much time in the actual house itself. But on one occasion, we were in the kitchen in the evening, having a cup of tea with the owner, when from the back room there was a huge crash, like a wardrobe being pushed over. The owner just put his finger up and whispered, "Please just pretend you didn't hear that. We don't want the children to be scared." We do a lot of work on repossessed houses, no pun intended, and houses going through probate, so visit a lot of empty properties often where the owner has recently died, and I've never in over 10 years been creeped out by a place like I was there. My friend let me know he was okay. This past year I lost one of my best friends to suicide. He was the most loving/goofy person I had in my life. He was obsessed with food and specifically ranch. It was always a running joke because he put ranch on everything. He was also a huge dog/cat lover. The day I found out that he passed away, I was sitting in my bed crying and my cat randomly decides to bring me something. My cat brought me a packet of ranch. This was the craziest thing ever as my cat has never brought me anything before and I immediately think of my friend every time I see ranch. I also normally don't keep ranch in the house, so this was especially weird. Turns out my roommate had grabbed one packet of ranch at the gas station the day before for no reason, just so crazy. Had to share. Kind of a goofy story, but I took it was a sign that my friend was okay and it made me feel better. That's it for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.